Oh, wow. Yeah. You smell that?
Yeah, I do. It smells kind of funky.
No, not funky. Fantastic. Somewhat comedic, but informative. That's our all-new intro brew. That's right, folks. Our Way to Roast intro brew. That's right. Today you can get your very own Our Way to Roast intro brew for just 17 payments of 35 high fives, 10 nights a week. You'll be on your way, starting every Sunday morning the right way with Our Way to Roast.
But I still have tea.
That's why this isn't working.
I'm sorry.
Anyways, let's get into it. Episode 18. Here we go.
Right across this country into the starlight. 12,000 miles, turn back, do it again. No destination, it's just a journey. You were my lover and friend.
This is episode 18. We are finishing up those big barn doors right on the back of the Unicell. We are also doing the freshwater plumbing, and we finish up a bunch of smaller projects and tie up a bunch of loose ends.
If you remember way back in the beginning of this Unicell build, the first thing we did was remove the garage style roll door that was in there. We knew right away we didn't want that. We thought about making some different doors, all kinds of ideas, but in the end, Unicell also makes these really nice barn doors that already fit the space perfect. It's a much more cohesive use of that back wall. Now you can open up the whole back wall of your house. It also allows you to get access to the garage underneath the bed. So it was a really nice option. We're really happy we went with these doors.
So we bought these doors from Unicell and a few episodes back installed them on the vehicle. That was a whole project in itself. Drew's brother came to help us hold them in place, get all three of the hinges on each door, plus the locking mechanisms. That was one giant project. But now that they're actually on the vehicle, we still had a lot of work ahead of us because they're completely silver on the inside and they're right next to the bed. They're a huge focal point in the build when the doors are closed. It kind of made it look like a refrigerator truck in there with the silver metal. They also weren't insulated and they didn't have any windows. We bought two smaller RV style windows. These are very small, but they do still slide open and have a screen. So that was our first step, was to put more holes into this vehicle by cutting out spots in the door for each window. This was a whole nerve-wracking process because not only did the window have to be lined up on the door itself, but we have two of them and they're right next to each other. And you want those doors to look uniform. You don't want it to be a little off when you look straight at the back of the vehicle. So we spent a lot of time just lining these up. I traced the window onto some cardboard to make a template, and with that template, it was a lot easier to put that up on the door, line everything up, and make sure that they looked symmetrical to each other.
We put them up on the doors, traced where we wanted to put the windows, and prepared to cut the holes. These doors are pretty interesting. They are 3 layers of material. The outside is a fiberglass, then you go to a plywood, and the inside is a thin sheet of metal. So putting the jigsaw through there was interesting because it's cutting 3 materials at once. Even when you're putting the drill through, you can kind of feel the different layers, get through the fiberglass, sort of jump through the wood, and then you gotta go pretty hard on the metal at the end. Once both the holes were cut, we placed the windows in, stepped back, made sure that we had them level and even, and they added so much. It was exactly what we needed. Even being a smaller window, it's allowing that natural light in. It is just what we needed to make the space feel a little more open, Also, you can open up the window and let some fresh air in. The next step was to frame the door out using some furring strips. This creates a gap for the insulation, as well as a place to secure the cedar planks.
We then cut all the pieces of the polyiso board, pressed it in place, and the doors were fully insulated. So now it was time to pick our cover material, our veneer, what we were gonna add to the top of these doors, essentially just to make them look nice. We went back and forth with a lot of different material choices for these doors, but ultimately we decided that we wanted something durable but light, so we didn't want to add a ton of weight to the doors. So we decided to use the same cedar planks that we used on the ceiling. These are really thin, they're about 3/8 inch thick. They're tongue and grooves, so they just snap together, and we can apply them to the furring strips with construction adhesive and some brad nails. It's so simple, and there's already a lot of cedar within the build, so it matches other places inside of the Unicell. The cedar looked so good on the inside of these doors, so now when you open the doors, you see those nice planks, and it kind of shows you what the inside is going to look like as well.
With all the materials in place, it was time to finally fully install the windows. Like with all the other windows, we removed the foam gasket and upgraded it with the butyl tape. Once that was in place, we set the windows in the hole, secured them with the framing on the inside by screwing it down, and they were fully installed.
At this point, we had the doors insulated, we had the cedar on the inside of them, and we also had 2 windows cut and installed. They are very, very close to being finished, but we have one last problem to solve, and that's the edges of the door. Because we raised the height or the overall thickness of the door, you could see the furring strips if you looked down the length of the door itself. So we needed to add a little bit of trim around the edges. We did this with some custom stainless steel angles. We cut them to the exact lengths for all the tiny little pieces of the door. Some of the edges are split up because of the locking mechanism, but we cut all those pieces, screwed them into place, and the door looked so good. It looked very finished with that trim on it, and it matched the rest of the interior with the cedar on the face. This week we finished up another major system in this build, and that is the fresh water plumbing. Now this is just the fresh water side, such as the tank, the water heater, the faucets, the shower, and we'll talk about the gray water system in another episode because it kind of has its own features and we want to highlight that in its own episode.
With the plumbing, I try to keep it as simple and straightforward as I can, but here's a quick run through of the basics of the system. First of all, we have a 75-gallon fresh water tank. That's a really large water tank for a build of this size. That gives you some real off-grid capability. In addition to the fresh water tank, we have a 6-gallon electric water heater, which has been converted to a 24-volt water heater, so it's easy to power off solar, so you can have hot water pretty much whenever you have sun. Of course, we have all the basics. Coming off of the water tank, there's a diversion valve, which allows you to winterize the system. After that, you go into your basic sediment filter, your water pump, and accumulator. After the accumulator, the system splits off in 3 directions. One to the sink, one to the outdoor shower out the back, and the other to the main shower up in the front. We also have a 3-stage water filter for drinking water. That intercepts the cold water line before it comes out of your sink faucet, takes the water, filters it, then sends it back out the small faucet next to your main faucet on your sink.
Just as in our past builds, we used the APEC 3-stage water filter for this system. We really like this water filter. It's pretty affordable and it's nice to have your drinking water filtered within your system. When we lived in our van, we would get filtered water from fill stations, store it in separate jugs, and that can be a really difficult and cumbersome way to handle your drinking water. It's so much easier to just have your drinking water filtered out of that fresh water tank, especially because you have 75 gallons. You might as well use some of that for your drinking water. When you're on the road, you're filling up your water tank from unknown water sources most of the time, and it's just really nice to have that peace of mind that the water you're drinking is filtered through this 3-stage filter.
Early on in the build, I ran the 2 PEX lines that would go to the shower. That's because these actually have to be underneath the wall. Other than that, I try to make all of the PEX lines accessible, so open underneath the bed or in the back of cabinets, so if there's ever an issue, you can actually get at them. Unfortunately, with the shower, it's either got to go underneath the vehicle and then back up behind the shower wall or behind the wall within the vehicle. I really don't like putting them underneath the vehicle because if it's very cold out, those lines are going to freeze. With the PEX lines run to the shower, I plumbed in the shower handle and the faucet early on. So that's been sitting there waiting for us to build that shower. That leg of the system has already been done for quite a while. It'd just be a matter of testing it once we have water in the system. With the shower, the sink, and the outdoor shower, I gave each leg of the system its own shutoff valves. So if you need to fix something with one of the faucet heads, you can turn those lines off so there's no water flowing in when you remove the faucet head. When installing the system, we had to consider the layout of each component. Now, in this build, underneath the bed is the biggest open space. The water tank is quite large, so it's sort of the only spot it can go, but putting it here allows you to center it on the axle, which is good for weight distribution. It gives us a nice big spot to put the water heater next to it, as well as the other components like the accumulator and the water pump.
For the plumbing system in this build, we were really fortunate to have a lot of space underneath the bed to work with when we were laying out all these pieces of the system. So we could really tuck them into the corner to make the footprint of that plumbing system as small as possible so that the rest of the area can be used for that garage storage space.
Once we mapped everything out, we realized we wanted to put the fresh water tank in the front of the bed. Given that we have these doors that open to the back, it was great because it allowed us to push the tank forward and keep all that space open and accessible as a garage.
We then marked out the locations for our main faucet and the little APAC water filter faucet that will go right next to it. You want to make sure that you get this hole right anytime you're putting a hole in butcher block. This is really thick wood and we double and triple check this mark before we actually drill the hole. Once the hole was in the countertop, then we could feed the faucet right through it and the lines both down through the hole and underneath the sink.
The only comfort I've found is blending in with another crowd. When things go wrong, we'll pass the blame around.
At this point, we had most of the pieces and parts in place. We had decided on their locations, but they were kind of just sitting there waiting to be connected to the water. Now it's time to run all those PEX lines between each part and connect it all to the water. This is the part where you have tiny little pieces of PEX this long and you need the cinch clamps on each little piece. It can be tedious, but in the end, everything then is connected to the fresh water source.
Everything has to be like the perfect size, so it can be a little frustrating. It was nice to have my brother there that day to just kind of like say, I need 3.5 inches, and he would cut the pieces for me. Definitely a lot more enjoyable than doing it myself, where I'm miscutting things. And, oh, it's too short, oh, it's too long, cut it short, now it's too short. You definitely have to get everything sized perfect. It can be a little frustrating, but having a second set of hands can definitely help out.
This is where I think one of the hardest parts comes in, and that is just making the PEX line look organized. If you have some wire clamps to secure the PEX to the wall and the bed frame, it'll help it hold up over time, look a little bit more organized, but in the end, there is still PEX pieces just coming from each component, and it can be really hard to make it look good.
It was time to bring the star tool of this installation back in, the hole saw. The hole saw, the hole saw, the hole saw. It's very helpful. So we had to do the freshwater inlet on the side of the vehicle. That meant marking the spot, taping it off, and then putting a hole saw through the fiberglass, through the wood wall, and installing the inlet. Once this hole is complete, we connected the hose to the fresh water tank. Now you have an easy way to fill up your tank from the outside of the vehicle.
Really moving. Spend your whole life wondering what to do. Can't help feeling.
In this Unicell build, we have a brand new feature that we don't usually include on the buses, and that is an outdoor shower. This is something that's really great to have when you're in nice weather. You can take a shower outside. If you have a dog and they run through the mud, you can wash them off outside before you get into the vehicle. There's just a million different ways to use something like this, and we always thought that we would love to have one on our bus, but it doesn't really make sense because we don't have a back door, we don't have a back gate, nothing opens up back there, so we never ended up installing one. But with the back of the vehicle being the way it is on this Unicell, with the doors opening in the garage space, we just thought it was the perfect opportunity to do one of these outdoor showers. Now, generally we don't run PEX lines on the exterior of the vehicle, and that's because if you get in cold weather, your water lines could freeze. But the way that this outdoor shower was mounted, it's actually mounted below the floor level on the vehicle, so we were forced to run these lines outside. So what we did to fix this potential issue is to put shutoff valves internally on the PEX lines that run out to the shower. So when you want to use that outdoor shower, you just turn the shutoff valves on and you have full hot and cold water lines running to the outdoor shower. When you're finished using it, you can turn those valves off and run the water out of the lines. Then there's no issue for that freezing on the outside of the vehicle. It's honestly just so nice to have water accessible on the outside of the vehicle, and not only does it have cold water, but it has hot water. That is one luxurious outdoor shower experience.
It's a really nice feature to have for sure. Speaking of hot water, let's quickly talk about the electric water heater. In our past builds, we've used that smaller 4-gallon Bosch water heater, but we knew we wanted to convert this to a DC source, in this case 24 volts. Now on the Bosch, it has a pretty unique sort of like flange that everything is mounted on. It's not very common. We converted ours to 12 volt in our bus, but we had to do some custom plate with welding. We know most people can't do that. On this build, we wanted to use a water heater that had a more universal heating element port, just so the conversion would be more straightforward, wouldn't require any welding or any special plate design. We did the DC conversion and now it runs off 24 volts. It's wired into the thermostat so it turns itself off when it reaches temperature. On top of the tank, we installed the winterizing kit. This basically allows you to divert water from ever going in the tank if you're trying to fill your lines with antifreeze to store for the winter. That way you don't have to fill the tank up with 6 gallons of antifreeze. You just drain the water out, shut off the valves, and then there's nothing in the tank. We made the PEX connections to the water heater and installed it in place.
The Unicell now has hot water. It runs on DC, which is pretty cool because traditionally a water heater is one of your biggest draws in a build like this. So having it on 24 volt is really beneficial for the power system.
I particularly like having this water heater on DC 24 volts because you can kind of use it as like a thermal battery. So you can store excess energy. During the day, your batteries are fully charged, that solar energy is still generating. Now you can dump it into the water, create hot water that stores up for later, and if you need hot water at night, you don't even need to pull energy from your batteries because you already have that energy stored up in the hot water.
Last but not least, the very important step of doing a water test.
Oh boy, here we go. Alright, I'm going to try the sink. I got a bucket here, some towels, so we will see if If anything leaks, hopefully it's threaded stuff and not PEX crimps, because that's more annoying. Easier to tighten this stuff down than to change these. But we will see what happens. Fire this water pump on. Pressure. Any leaking over there?
No.
Alright, I don't see any leaks so far, and underneath looks good, but you got to get the pressure. If it's a really small leak, it'll take a while before you see that coming out, so get it pressurized and check back in 10 minutes or something. Gotta go through every single connection, see if any of them are leaking. Feels right. Watch and see if these are leaking. With water filter.
So it's pumping it into the APAC water filter.
I got a leak here.
You found a leak?
Yeah, the little offshoot for the water filter. I think I just have to tighten it down.
Oh, it wasn't even tightened?
It was tight, but not very tight. Like, I'm able to hand tighten it, so I probably just gotta hit it with a wrench.
You gotta finish tightening things before the water test or you're definitely gonna have a leak.
Well, it was tight, but I think it was only hand tight.
Nothing's coming.
Here. No? Nothing?
Nothing.
What now?
Nope.
Really?
Nothing's coming out of it.
Oh, shut it off, shut it off, shut it off. Hey guys, welcome back. Turns out this line from the filtered water system was leaking really bad. I don't know if I just didn't have it seated in there well enough. We're gonna turn the water pump back on and hope it doesn't happen. It was squirting water everywhere. So, let's try again.
No water just flowing out under the sink?
No, not this time. The first time, yes. Not so much now. I think we're good down here. We can go try the shower and we'll look at this a little later, see if there's any really slow leaks somewhere. We gotta turn the shower on and see what's going on. And see if there's any leaking. Time to test the final fun feature, outdoor shower. Those valves need to be turned on.
And there's hot water out here too, right?
Yes.
Dang.
I know, it's a... Okay.
Look at that water pressure.
So you can control it a little bit with these. Alright, so what we gotta do...
This one is intense. Our freshwater system was fully in place. All of the water spots were fully functioning. We could now fill up water and store it underneath the bed on the inside of the vehicle. And so now we will have the gray water system to talk about coming up in a future episode. Really excited to get this system in place. It's sort of the life of the whole vehicle. If you have everything else and you don't have water, you're going back to town, which is why we like to put large systems in our builds so you're actually off-grid capable. You're not going out there with 15 gallons and needing to drive back to town in 2 days. This build has 75 gallons of fresh water. That is incredible. To finish up this episode, we're gonna tie up a few loose ends, some small projects that have been going on in the background while the power system, the water system, all those big things were being finished. First up is a small entry wall that we love to include in our builds. We've done it in every single one, but this is a slatted wall, and we like this style because it divides the door off from the rest of the space, but it still allows light through, and that's really important to making the space feel open and not too closed off. We painted this wall in our last shuttle bus build, but in this one, we did the same thing as our own bus, and we stained it with waterlock so it could match the rest of the woods. I just love this entry wall. It adds a lot of character to the space, and I feel that this Unicell does need a little bit of extra aesthetic design because it's so square. It doesn't have the curve that the buses have, so it needs a little bit extra to give that inside some character. And while we're in the entryway, I also added 2 hooks right underneath the switch panel that is to the left of the door when you walk in. This is a really small thing in the build, but it's actually very helpful. It's where we hang our keys, dog leashes, headlamps. It's really nice to be able to make a storage space out of the flat side of a cabinet. We also added latches to the fridge slide and the drawer underneath the oven. In our experience, these are the 2 drawers that really needed latches and would open when we were driving. In our experience, the other drawers, as long as they don't have too much weight in them, the soft close drawer slides will keep them shut. We haven't had too much of an issue with that, and we like these latches because they're easy to engage before you drive, but they also aren't always locking the drawer. Some of the baby locks can be really annoying to use. So you latch these before you drive, they stay locked, you unlock them when you get there, and rinse and repeat. Next up is a small cubby area right next to the bed. We've also done this tiny little cubby in all of our builds. In our own bus, this is where I keep my chapstick, my phone, anything small that you would have on an end table next to a bed is essentially what I keep in here. Having this cubby is really nice versus just putting all that stuff on the countertop because every time you drive, you would have to remove all that stuff from the countertop, but if it's in a cubby, it can just stay in place and it doesn't fly around every time you get in the driver's seat. I actually forgot about this cubby. I would have done it long ago when I was making the booth itself, but it wasn't too hard to cut into the back of the booth after the fact. I made a little cubby, put it into the gap, screwed it in place, added a little bit of framing around the outside, and it looked perfect. One of the final projects for the cabinets was adding the drawer pulls. We added these to all the drawers and door faces on the lower kitchen cabinets. We also added them to the overcab compartment and to the storage area with 3 drawers underneath the heater. The fridge compartment is a little bit different. The fridge sits in its own little tray so that it can still ventilate out the sides, and because of that, the door comes up much higher than the face of the tray. In order to make all of this secure when you're pulling it in and out, we attach the fridge to the drawer face using a little bit of a spacer and a strap that gets screwed in on both sides. Once you put the handle on the front and you have that strap, attaching the fridge to the drawer face to the tray, everything is kind of secured into itself. You have a lot more stability when you're pulling it in and out. The final thing that happened this week is I redid my window framing. When I first did this window framing, I really thought that it looked okay. And over time, as I painted it and I sanded it, it just was not doing what I wanted it to do. And I figured out it's because I did the inside face of the window after I did the little triangles in the corner, and that created a gap. I thought I could fill this gap, but as I was filling it and trying to smooth it over and sand it, it just was not working. And I kept saying to myself, it'll get better, it'll be fine, it'll look good. And it was not looking good, and it was bothering me so much. You can actually see in this clip where the little gaps are and how I added that facing after the triangles. So I basically went back through, I took all the framing off the wall, I rebuilt it, I put that facing on, and then I put the triangles in the corner. Once it was painted, it looks just like this. It looks so much better. It literally soothes a part of my soul to have redone this window framing. I feel so much better about it, and I'm really proud of how it looks now.
It looks really good, and it's all part of the process, right? You know, You make something, you build it, and if you see it's not perfect, you always find ways to improve. You're always learning. So once you learn a new technique, you employ it. It's awesome that you're able to say, it's not quite to my standards. I'm going to take it back down and I'm going to do it better.
This is a slightly different style of window framing than I did in any of the prior buses, and it just didn't work out for me. And that's okay, and that's why I wanted to talk about it, because everything is a learning experience and it's totally fine to not get it in the first shot. That's why I went back and I redid it, and now I'm just so much happier with it. I'm so much happier to show it to you, and I'm proud of how it looks inside the Unicell. Episode 18, that was a doozy. That was a lot of information in one episode.
All those little loose ends are tied up. All that finishing work, it's starting to come together and look really polished. And now we have the water system in place, the power, the propane, all the big systems are in place. This thing is set up to take off grid. A build like this, you are not tied to the city. You are not tied to an RV park. This is the whole point. You can take this somewhere beautiful and hang out for a while.
And we will see you next time for episode 19.
Later.